Zodiak exclusive. Well, I'm sure you've heard about the Russia-Ukraine war. This is the kind of war that has affected a number of countries across the globe, and of course including Malawi. And today we are privileged to have a journalist as well as a political scientist from Ukraine. He is Peter Zalmayev. Of course, he's the Ukrainian-American political scientist, a journalist, and director of Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Welcome.
Thank you
to Zodiak Exclusive.
Pleasure.
As well as to Malawi.
The warm heart of Africa.
The warm heart of Africa, sure. How do you find it?
Well, I find it a bit warmer than some of the other countries I've been to Africa so far. I don't want to be comparing unfavorably anything, but I came up through the entire length of Mozambique, and I found that there's and I like all the people that I meet in Mozambique, in Eswatini, in Botswana, Lesotho, South Africa. But yeah, there's something about Malawi that does justify this nickname that you have. It does feel especially warm, and I felt like this is the heart of Africa. Of all the African countries, this is my 8th on this trip so far, and this is the most African kind of country that I have experienced so far, and that goes with my previous expectations of what Africa is about.
Okay. Now I've done a background search of you. You've been traveling a lot recently, and I understand you are on a world tour. You are traveling to 40 countries. Tell us why.
40 countries, 400 days, and I started off in South Pacific. That's island nations beyond Australia, like Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, New Zealand, Australia. Then I flew across the Indian Ocean to here, and I'm making my way from South Africa all the way to Libya, and then maybe beyond, and I want to do the whole round trip of Africa. It might take a year, it might take more. I might not be able to complete it, we'll see, right? But so far, 20 countries, so I'm like halfway. And these are the countries that I've selected where people don't have immediate personal contact with Ukraine, and Ukrainians hardly ever visit. You probably don't, in most of the places in Malawi I have visited, have not had Ukrainian visitors before. People shake my hand specifically because they want to shake a Ukrainian hand, because they've never had that experience. And so this is an opportunity for me to engage with the people and to tell them why I think the war in Ukraine is important, and the outcome is so important for the fate, the destiny of the world. We can't just be indifferent to it, even though it's a world away. We already felt, and people here have been telling me stories how the war has affected them economically and otherwise. And should Ukraine fail, we will see a kind of a domino effect in the entire world.
Now, it's been 3 years since this war broke out. Why do you think it is important for countries to know the truth about this war?
It is important to know the truth because in our world of post-truth, as the preeminent Yale professor Timothy Snyder put it, it's a post-truth world where social media is so segmented that we're living in parallel informational universes where we just don't connect. We don't hear the other side of the story. So there's a lot of people here in Africa and elsewhere who might be getting a totally different picture of what's happening in Ukraine, and that largely has to do with the way our enemy, Russia and its propaganda, have been very actively working to put forward their own narratives of this war. How that it is an anti-imperialist war, how that Russia is fighting some kind of a war of liberation and helping and championing this way the rights of other countries in their fight against the former colonial masters. So they have cleverly used this, the Soviet past, when they were part of the Soviet Union, right, and how the Soviet Union helped African countries gain their independence and fight against apartheid, right? How they are the flag bearer, they're the heir to the Soviet, policy of helping African countries, etc. Forgetting that Ukraine was also part of the Soviet Union, was also part of that project, right? And so they're saying that we're the victim and we're trying to, fight against the Americans and the West because they're using Ukraine against us. Whereas for Ukraine, this is a very simple issue. Ukraine is fighting for its survival. You know, it's fighting against a former colonial master that is trying to get that colony back. That's how you look at it. That's how it is. You know, Russia has controlled Ukraine for centuries. Then, for a short period of time after the Soviet Union fell apart in 1991, Ukraine had independence. But you know, in 2014, Putin decided to go on the offensive. Putin became obsessed with this historical mission, as he sees it, to restore the Soviet Union in one shape or another, right? And without Ukraine, that strategy is stillborn. It's not going. I mean, Ukraine is a crucial component.
Peter, like I said, 3 years down the line,
Yeah.
why do you want people to know the truth now?
I mean, because we haven't done enough. I mean, since not just 3 years, but Ukraine has been kind of missing in action in these countries, and especially in Africa.
Okay.
And I'm pleased to say that since the war started 3 years ago, but you know what? Let me just actually correct you there. The war started really in 2014, so it really started 11
Way back.
years ago, with the annexation of Crimea and the Western lack of proper response, right, on President Obama at the time. Then the start of the war in the east of Ukraine, and then the full invasion already in 2022. So there's several stages to that.
The escalation in 2002.
Yes.
Okay, fine.
And so, and since 2022, Ukraine has opened 10 new embassies on the African continent. So I think it's a paradox when both Russia and Ukraine are actually fighting for the hearts and minds of African countries because of the importance of Africa, because of the way they voted the United Nations General Assembly, right? Condemning resolutions or abstaining in resolutions condemning the aggression, etc. For economic reasons, etc., right? At the same time, the administration of Donald Trump, and now I'm speaking as I'm a dual citizen, I'm a Ukrainian American.
Okay.
So Donald Trump is seriously thinking about closing down embassies. And I heard that U.S. Embassy in Malawi may be moved to Harare. So this is a paradox, and I'm very disheartened, you know, about how America is just giving up on its soft power this way. Whereas, on the other hand, both Russia and Ukraine are stepping up their game on the continent.
Now, you are both a journalist
Yeah.
as well as a political scientist. Why have you taken it up yourself?
Well, I mean, after 3 years sitting in the studio and doing just being a colleague, but in Ukraine, and broadcasting on local TV on a daily basis and YouTube, and also giving interviews to foreign TV channels like day in and day out, I really got burned out. I mean, on a very human level, I decided I need to just kind of get some fresh air and take a longer kind of a broader view of what is happening and use some of my knowledge and my skills elsewhere. And I decided to go to, once again, those countries I had never visited before. And instead of just constantly pontificating, talking on BBC, CNN, and Al Jazeera, I wanted to go into those countries and concentrate on local media. And not just media, but I engaged with fellow, civil society actors, just people on the street, people on remote islands in South Pacific, people in Cape Maclear here, or in Mulanje, people that will take you up into the mountains, your guides, your taxi drivers, just engaging with people from both national TV and just on the ground, on the street, talking about the war, not just telling them no, but hearing also what they have to say about the war. I have a TV program, like yourself. I have a TV program in Ukraine, on Ukrainian TV, and so I'm able to report on my travels for them.
Okay. Now, as a political scientist, I'm sure you know that the war has brought the world economy to its knees, and we want to find out which areas do you think need to be given the urgent attention, starting with the Ukraine itself.
Well, I think that once again, a lot of the problem the world is facing is informational. We have been losing social cohesion. We have been losing a common narrative, something that makes Ukrainians Ukrainians, something that makes Americans Americans, right? All of a sudden, we have different kinds of Americans. We have become tribal. So social cohesion has frayed at the edges. Social cohesion has been coming apart at the seams, to use several analogies. And that cuts across the board. I mean, the story as you travel around the world, in every country that you visit, the story is always the same. There's something wrong in the air. We have, ceased to communicate properly with each other. There's a lot of hatred. There's a lot of trolling.
Is there propaganda?
And
Propaganda, as you put it?
Propaganda, but it's also the very format of our news that we consume. Social media decreases the price you pay for being toxic. When you are just hiding under an anonymous nickname or avatar on Facebook or Twitter, there's no price to pay for calling someone a dog or a monkey, this, that, or the other, right? And Donald Trump, I'm sorry, but has set the stage for that. He cannot call people he does not like normal names. He invents derogatory names for them. So when you have the leader of this free world doing that, he sets the example for everyone to follow, right? And the very format, as I'm saying, of our social media makes it very uncostly. Like just to, when you see the same person in life, someone who would call me a dog on Facebook or a sellout or whatever bad names, that person sees me on the street, chances are he'll come up to me, he'll smile shyly and say, "Can I shake your hand?" Chances are he will not be able to say the same thing in my face. So that means that we're all prisoners of this kind of new format that we have invented, and that we still haven't found the tools to deal with it, to come back to normal. And the question is, are we ever going to be able to come back to normal and be able to communicate, hear the other side of the story as well? That has impacted our policymakers in the U.S., where I think we can talk about it later, but it is a very weird time. I started my travel in September under the previous administration last year. And during that time, I was in Fiji, in that island, South Pacific island nation, and the election happened, and the new president, and all of a sudden, that president is threatening to walk away from the whole Ukraine-Russia war if they don't make peace. Because, and so that's been very strange. Now that America is no longer, it's no longer clear what America stands for, if it stands with its allies, if it stands by Ukraine, or if it doesn't. Very weird times.
Okay, so in other ways, this war is not just about Russia and Ukraine. It's a world issue.
And I think it's just basically when Putin, when you remember, he sat in that office at his desk and at like 4 a.m, and he was announcing that war, and shortly after he stopped, or as he was speaking, the bombs started falling. I remember that moment. I'm waking up in Kiev at 5 a.m. with bombs going off, and Putin is finishing his speech. So as he was finishing his speech,
how did he feel?
It's the worst moment of my life. It's the scariest moment. It's the darkest moment. But when you're in it, you're just immobilized. You have to move your kids out. You have to start run out and line up and get some food. Because stores might be closed. So you're just too busy to think of what's happening around. But as I look back, those were very dark days, and February in Ukraine is a very dark, gloomy month, and it's a very cold month. You have to understand. It was like, and so that week, last week of February and first weeks of March are forever engraved in my memory as this dark, complete darkness and evil. And so as he was sitting there and announcing that he has to start this special military operation, which is the euphemism that Russians have used to call this war, they didn't even want to call it a war, right? Because Putin wanted to hide the truth from his own people of what he's really doing in Ukraine. Just a small military operation will go in a week, will be done. 3.5 years later, 1 million people dead and wounded, Russian soldiers. We're still there, right? And he's still in power. It's crazy, right? But this was an announcement of a brave new world that, like you said, it's not just Ukraine. This will be impacting, and is already impacting, the entire globe.
Yes.
This sets a precedent. This means probably decades of turbulence around the world. So this is not just one particular war. It will be getting multiplied in different shapes and forms around the globe. We're already seeing it. Shortly after, we had the big Gaza blow up, right, and it's still going on. There's potential for conflicts elsewhere between Guyana and Venezuela. Just to give you the broad geography of South America, what Venezuela has been looking over at Guyana, because Guyana is sitting on significant oil reserves, and all of a sudden Maduro is talking about, we need to take what's ours. and they're redrawing maps, you know,
Okay.
where half of Guyana is now Venezuela. Imagine what that would mean, you know. And so in China versus Taiwan, Taiwan's future is in question as well. Many potential problems around the world.
Okay, now, I've heard you speak to other media outlets that the Russia-Ukraine war is far from over, and you were talking about this not, ending anytime soon. What makes you say that?
I mean, I'm not the only one who's so skeptical. Most of political analysts, not just in Ukraine but elsewhere, will tell you that there's just no conditions right now for peace, right? Okay. Just because Donald Trump went in and he's like, that was his campaign promise to solve this within 24 hours. And then, they he stepped up his game. He's spoken with Putin by phone already 4 times, and he said that he would be happy to meet, and he has been willing to give Putin everything that he wanted. You want this official recognition of occupied territory, we'll give it to you. You want a hard no to Ukraine's NATO membership, we give it to you. And let me remind you, that was Putin's reason, right? That's the reason and the argument he used, including in African countries, where people, journalists, your colleagues, ask me, well, Putin just went in to Ukraine to prevent it from NATO from expanding, right? He feels it's an existential danger. Well, his actions in Ukraine led to 2 new members joining NATO, Sweden and Finland, because of Putin's belligerent actions, right, in Ukraine.
Okay.
And now that Ukraine said, okay, the U.S. said we're not going to support Ukraine's membership in NATO, why isn't Putin stopping this war? If that's what he wanted, it's because that reason was BS. I'm sorry, right? This was a fake reason. It may have been part of the reason, but the real one is it's an old school colonial war of conquest. Putin does not recognize Ukraine as a separate nation, deserving of a separate, nationhood. It's as if one of the larger Bantu peoples, let's say, just to use the analogy, like the Zulus, decided to take over the Basutu people next door, right? It's like a Basutu, I mean, we have to speak similar languages, and they're sitting right in the middle of the country, like, let's just take over Basutu land, right? Lesotho. We're similar people, but, we shouldn't be different countries. Just to use an imperfect analogy, there's potential for all sorts of conflicts like that on the African continent. People who speak similar languages, but still have their own unique identities. And that's what Ukrainians have. Putin decided that Ukraine should not have its own identity.
So you're saying...
And it should be part of Russia.
Donald Trump's efforts will not yield anything towards the ceasefire.
I mean, I cannot denigrate my president, just like Zelensky is my president, Trump is my president, his efforts to make peace. And I don't want to second guess that he wants people to stop dying. That's what he's been saying. So we should actually welcome that. But the way he's gone about it, pressing, in demanding concessions from one side but not the other, being impartial to Putin, and you saw the treatment Zelensky got in the Oval Office, and we've gone along with him. We've given everything. We signed this rare earths and minerals deal with Trump, everything, and Putin is still not. And Putin just, if anything, Trump's peace efforts has led to an increase in bombardments that we face every day. Just yesterday, and hundreds of drones all over Ukrainian cities the day before. It's like now happening on a regular basis. So if anything, it seems like whatever Trump's intentions are and his peace-making initiatives, they've made it worse for us. Putin is openly humiliating Trump after everything is said and done. That's why Trump knows he has no cars left. And so he's just threatening to walk away. Because the other alternative, step up sanctions, join with the allies across the Atlantic, the European Union, and increase sanctions on Russia, increase the flow of weapons to Ukraine. For some reason, Donald Trump is not willing to take that step. At least now. He has threatened it, but he continues to postpone it. Like, okay, another 2 weeks I give Putin, let's see, another 2 weeks. 2 weeks pass, and he's like, Ukraine is also should not have bombed these. I'm referring to the bombing of the planes.
Okay.
Deep inside Russia, thousands of kilometers inside. You saw that in a unique operation with the drones, etc. Trump was upset that Ukraine had not informed him in advance. So now he has a chance to again criticize Zelensky and Ukraine, and so it's very confusing. We don't know what Trump is going to do, but it's not been very encouraging to see how he's been played for a fool by Vladimir Putin.
Well, you've talked about a number of interventions that are being undertaken by different, countries to support Ukraine. You just talked about, the American government as well, the Trump administration announcing some measures as well. But you said that is not enough. And here you are in Africa. What do you want African countries to do to support this movement?
Well, first of all, I think at least the African countries need to hear our side of the story, right? And there are economic relations the countries have with Ukraine, and even Malawi is engaged in a certain economic, trade
Definitely.
with Ukraine, which has decreased with the start of the war, unfortunately. Countries like South Africa, that sort of the hub for this whole region, they are as members of BRICS, which is a organization which brings together Russia and China, etc. Have a unique role to play as a potential mediator in this conflict, because so far we've seen that Turkey has failed, Saudi Arabia has failed, right, and all these other countries. So my position is, why not Africa? Let me remind you that 2 years ago, a group of 9 African presidents visited Kiev and actually fell under a bombardment and had to hide in a bomb shelter. And that's a true story.
Okay.
Ramaphosa, and I'm not sure if the Malawi president was not there, but at least I know our presidents have had 2 phone conversations already, and our foreign minister visited Malawi a couple of years ago. So when it comes to, we still have the United Nations. U.S. still hasn't quit or stopped, its contributions to the United Nations, so we still have it. African countries have a vote like everyone else. And every year we have a General Assembly in New York in September where they vote for these resolutions. So instead of abstaining, I hope that African countries continue to vote their conscience and continue to vote against this, aggression. That's a very important, instrument of pressure, because Russia is also using, every time an African country abstains, for example, in these resolutions or votes with Russia, they produce, this is like a demonstration of support of Russia, which they use for their propaganda purposes, to say that no, we're not isolated, and look, we have this support. Once again, I'm not here to tell African countries who they should or shouldn't be friends with. This is not my role. You will decide if you want to have economic relations with Russia. I'm not here to tell you, or our foreign minister shouldn't be the one. When I was in Namibia a month ago, they had just signed a nuclear power cooperation agreement with Russia.
Okay.
And that's a done deal. Okay, I understand that, But I think at least I want the public here to be educated in, about at least both sides of the issue and to make a decision, so, what is really happening. Russians are very actively trying to, like I said, to put forward the narrative how it's just a defensive war and the NATO thing. Once again, I'm here to say, well, listen, let's see what's happening. And what's happening is that the negotiating parties have, and the Americans, the mediators, have told them, Ukraine will not be a member of NATO. Okay, where's Putin now? Let's see it for what it is. It's not any anti-colonial war that Russia is waging. It's a war of conquest. That if Russia should be allowed to prevail, will set a very unpleasant, to put it mildly, precedent for the entire world, as I've already said.
Well, I had a chance to watch one of the interviews you did, I think, in Namibia. And there was an issue of some students being chased out of Ukraine because of the war, because they had to rush back for their safety. Malawi, I think, has been benefiting the issue of trade. You mentioned, I think wheat comes from there. Maybe production of bread here has been compromised because of the war. Maybe what would be your message, really, because the supply chain has really been affected?
Well, the message is that the supply chain has been affected directly by Russia, right? So Russia is championing itself as a friend of African countries. And when the war started, they started blocking our port in Odessa, the Black Sea port. That's the main conduit, right, for Ukraine's grain and wheat to be, traveling outside of Ukraine into these African countries. Egypt, for example, suffered tremendously. They have a huge population. Prices went up. But, even looking at Malawi, prices went up, even if they don't, for example, buy as much percentage-wise of Ukrainian wheat as some other countries, like Bangladesh or India or Egypt. The margin of living here is so precarious, right? People live, below a lot of people live below poverty level, that any fluctuation in the global price of grain makes a huge difference. And so this should increase pressure, and it actually did, and that's what actually caused Putin to use Erdogan of Turkey as a mediator to come to peace with this and to stop blocking the ports. It wasn't really too successful. Ukraine actually had to, supplement those efforts by essentially disabling Russia's navy in the Black Sea Fleet, using its drones, etc. This asymmetrical warfare. So essentially, we kept these Russian, ships in docks because it was just they're essentially inoperable. The drone warfare has just really redrawn all and rewritten all navy and military books, as you know, right? So we've been able to do it with some pressure, including on the part of so-called global south and African countries and others, because African countries started to suffer as a result of this. And so every time something like this happens, let's just not blame Ukraine, let's not blame the victim. Let's continue to remember who the perpetrator of this war. This is a war by choice that was started by Putin and unfortunately supported by the majority of Russian people. I mean, at least that's my understanding.
And talking about the response now from the countries we've been to, what's the response really? What's the response like?
Well, the response, like folks on the street when you meet them, even in Africa, where I've been told that there's a lot of sympathy for the Russian position, and there's a lot of also sympathy for Putin, who's been working very hard on this macho image of someone taking on these nasty former colonial countries, right? And someone who's helped liberate Cote d'Ivoire and Niger and Mali and Central African Republic, where Russian mercenaries have been assisting in overthrowing governments, one after another after another. So Russia has in fact replaced some of those old colonial masters with themselves. It won't be long before people start rising up against them as new colonial masters, because Russians are using it cynically, I suspect, because all these countries are rich in resources. Right before the war started, the New York Times had a huge story about the election in Madagascar, where Russian operatives supported both sides of the contest, in the presidential election. The Prigozhin people from the Wagner group. So we have to be very careful about the role the Russians are playing, on the continent.
Now, these countries are led by politicians, and I'm sure the war might be as a result of the political decisions that were made by these leaders. You are a political scientist. Maybe your message to African leaders, the continent you are touring now, some of the countries are having elections in a few months to come. What would be your message?
Well, I mean, I'm not in a position to be appealing to presidents or the people how to vote. Obviously, I just hope that Africa, believe it or not, we're living in really weird times. When, in fact, soon African countries will start displaying greater understanding of liberal democracy than what we're doing in America, right? I hope that people continue to understand that free press is essential to a liberal democracy, right? And I hope that we will be able to overcome very soon this disease of populism, that both left-wing, right-wing populism, people making unrealistic promises, people making promises of easy solutions. And a case in point is that Trump's 24 hours, right, and I will solve this, Ukraine war situation, 24 hours. That's like a very vivid illustration of how you should not trust these politicians. Life is always more complicated than that.
And now, you are traveling to how many countries?
About, 40 countries. That's my goal, in 400 days.
And you are not boarding in a plane?
I had to board the plane from Australia to South Africa. It would have taken a long time to cross the Indian Ocean. But once I'm in Africa, yes, I've been just doing the rounds strictly by buses, rental cars whenever it's possible. Local, just a passenger in a chapela, they call it in Mozambique. Here, you have these small collective buses that get very full of people. That's an experience. Unless you've been in an African bus, you haven't been to Africa.
And after the 400 days, what do you want to see as an impact?
I mean, I don't want to be, I'm not presumptuous to say that I will have moved mountains and changed narratives and paradigms, but this message does get across. I'm very gratified and satisfied when people meet me on the street after an appearance. Like, for example, after our talk show, I'll be hopefully traveling to Likomo Island, and people will come up to me, oh, we saw your, let's talk about it. I wanted, you said this thing, and I wanted to ask you. That is, it brings me great satisfaction.
Okay.
And every time I leave a country, I will have left contacts who will stay in touch with me. A lot of them will continue calling me for, once I'm already outside the country, I'll still be doing interviews. I'll be, linking in with TV and radio, and that's very gratifying, just to continue to stay in touch, having built these bridges.
Being a journalist, would you say the media has done enough in our country to educate the world about whatever's happening there?
My media in my country,
Yes.
we've definitely made progress, and I'm doing this largely self-funded. Some support from a private donor, just a little, not even 50%, but a little bit to help cover some of my expenses. But I don't get money from the government. The government hasn't, been doing enough, simply because it doesn't have the budget like the Russians do. Once again, it's a very lopsided conflict. It's David versus Goliath. Ukraine has 5 times smaller population, and the territory is probably like 20 times smaller than Russia. You just look at the map, and Russia has huge oil and gas money. It's continuing to trade and sell its oil, and that's why sanctions haven't been very useful, unfortunately. And so there's this huge disparity, and so we don't have that much support from the government to be doing what, like the Russians are doing. They have lots of money to spend on propaganda efforts, etc. So these are largely kind of self-funded, like crowd-funded efforts, but people are already traveling. There are groups of fellow journalists and professors at the academics traveling to various African countries, Latin American, Asian, to talk about Ukraine. So, it's happening.
You just hinted about the source of your funding, because that's what I wanted to also focus on. Traveling to 40 countries by road, mainly by road. That should be very expensive.
Well, but flying by plane would be probably 3 times as expensive.
Of course.
Especially, as you know, in Africa. It's not Europe where you have, charter, low-cost, low-budget airlines, and you can fly from Berlin, Germany to London, UK, will round trip for €100. Imagine that. It does not happen in Africa. Everything is very expensive here. So actually, I'm cutting down on my costs by traveling by buses, etc. And I'm trying to do it on the cheap. I stay at hotels for $20, $30 a night. Nothing fancy, So it's still in the long run pretty expensive. I'm using my pretty much life savings to do this.
So 50% self-funded?
Yeah, more than 50%. About 40% I have support from a donor, an organization that promotes this sort of cultural exchange.
Okay, maybe before we let you go, maybe you may have message to the Malawian people as you move to other countries, because I know from here you're going where?
Zambia.
Zambia.
Yeah.
Before you go to Zambia, what would be your last message?
Once again, my message is keep an open mind about, things people tell you. Always verify what they say, verify what I say, You would verify, and you did some, check on me, right? Background check, because, we are living in increasingly precarious times informationally. We have to be very smart about the sources of our information, right? So it's a constant process of self-education and awareness.
So in short, your journey is about what?
So the journey is about love, and connection. Like, as a great
And telling the truth
great
about
British classical writer E.M. Forster is known to have said, only connect. That's all we can and should do when we travel to other places. Make that personal connection, and everything, I think, will fall into place.
What lessons do you think Malawi could learn from this conflict?
I think the lesson is never take peace for granted. Be peace. 1 minute you have peace, and it can crumble very, very fast. And it's always much easier to destroy things than to build them up. And before you know it, things can spin out of control. I'm not talking about just an aggression from a neighbor, but a civil war. And we've come to the place where now people are seriously thinking that a civil war in the United States, the world's most up till now stable and oldest democracy, is possible. Look at what's happening on the streets of Los Angeles. The National Guard has been deployed to put down not even riots, but demonstrations, unhappy with Trump's immigration policies. If that can happen there, it can happen anywhere. So I know Malawi has been blessed with peace since its very beginning, and people should continue, appreciating it and never taking it for granted.
All right, that's Peter Zalmayev. He's a Ukrainian-American political scientist, a journalist, and the director of Eurasia Democracy Initiative.
Could you do it? Could you do a little bit of this for you?
Oh, okay.
As you see, I have so many. It would be a shame if I didn't share.
This is what?
It's a bracelet in the colors of Ukrainian flag with our ancient symbol, the trident.
Okay.
So for you to remember our meeting.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Pleasure.
All right, and thank you so much for joining
Zikomo.
us.
Zikomo and дякую in Ukrainian. Дякую.
Oh, дякую. Okay. You also speak French?
Un peu. Merci.
Okay. And this has been Franklin Mtambaliga. Thank you for watching Zodiak Exclusive.